Kentucky Space has been in existence for 4 years. Actually, the parent company that created Kentucky Space, the Kentucky Science Technology Corporation, has been around for 20 plus years, and they created and have spun off another subsidiary called Kentucky Space.
What is Kentucky Space's mission statement?
Well, basically, Kentucky Space is a independent nonprofit enterprise that involves a consortium of a number of different organizations, companies, and universities, really focusing on the design and development of small entrepreneurial space platforms for uses in the entrepreneurial space, education, commercial, etc. So we're really focused on the development of relatively small, relatively inexpensive, but potentially very high value spacecraft and space technologies.
How would you explain the value proposition to the man on the street?
Well, basically, I think with this new kind of vision that's been rolled out for NASA by NASA and others, I think what's happening is we're going to see a lot more opportunities for organizations, people, students, etc., to go and approach low Earth orbit. And I think once we get into low Earth orbit on a much more regular basis, on a fairly modest cost basis, we'll be able to engage for the first time in some really true iterative research and knowledge development. And I think as a consequence of that, I think there's a lot of unanswered questions that we can begin to look at in low Earth orbit. Issues of certainly communications is one, looking at new kinds of materials, looking at issues of certainly solar energy in space, and also we happen to think in our view there's a lot of really interesting biomedical and biomedicine applications and things to look at in microgravity. Microgravity is such a fundamentally different environment that we happen to believe that based on some of the evidence we've seen so far, that there could be some pretty interesting possible answers in microgravity for certain kinds of diseases that we currently, chronic diseases, other kind of things that we're trying to treat, both in terms of perhaps biopharmaceutical applications, perhaps tissue regeneration and other kinds of things, as well as maybe even things in areas like cancer treatment and other things. So I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities that are going to be opened up.
You mentioned in the panel that you were on that you plan to send middle school and high school students to the International Space Station.
Experiments. Yeah, what we formed, Kentucky Space has formed a partnership with NanoRacks LLC, which is a small aerospace company in Houston, and together we have formed a strategic alliance that, among other things, led to a Space Act agreement being signed by NanoRacks with NASA that basically allows us and provides an opportunity for us to develop very, very small what we call cube labs, which are basically plug-and-play research laboratories, basically 1 kilogram, about the size of a Kleenex box, give you some sense of how big they are, on this new research and development platform called a NanoRack, which is basically a plug-and-play system that sits on the middeck of the space station that allows these kinds of cube labs to be plugged in, have power, USB, data possibilities, and other kinds of things. And this is really opening up a new opportunity in iterative research. We currently have 2 NanoRacks that have been co-designed and co-built by Kentucky Space and NanoRacks that are on the space station now. So we currently have 32 kilograms of research mass. And in addition to the entrepreneurial and commercial opportunities that we see, one of the things that we also want to do is open up new opportunities for middle and high school students. And so we have basically designed and developed something we call the STEM Space Lab, which is basically a designated space on one of these NanoRacks for the development and flying of students' experiments from middle and high school students. And I think from our standpoint, one of the important things about this is it's not a simulation, it's not a PowerPoint presentation. We're actually going to be providing students with an opportunity to design and develop and fly real space research. And we think that's a very important step to take, both in terms of education in this country, but also, quite frankly, because we think that students are reservoirs of lots of new ideas. They're not burdened by knowing what they can't do. And we really believe that we'll actually discover some things through their research that will be important.
And will set up a process
yes.
for application?
Yes, we'll be setting up a process. Basically, this STEM Space Lab will be kind of a virtual laboratory on space station. We'll have a process by which students can make basically proposals to fly missions. They'll go through a mission process exactly like anybody else would to fly space missions, and then we'll be working with them to put their experiments on space station, get the data, help analyze it, and go from there.
When do you anticipate this beginning?
We expect that we'll do our first call for mission proposals in the fall of 2010, so relatively soon. Within the next 4 months or so, we expect to do our first call for mission experiments from schools around the country.
And do you have a ballpark on when the first actual experiments will go into space?
I'd say probably in 2011. I mean, I think if we do our call this year, we would expect to fly those sometime in the latter part of 2011. So a very quick, one of the things we want to impress is that these, we can now with this new NASA vision actually develop payloads and missions, get them into space, get the results very quickly, as opposed to doing something that takes years and years. The problem with that is that, by the time, if it takes that long, several generations of science and knowledge have already progressed. So we think it's important to be able to get students' experiments and other kinds of experiments up there, back, tweak them, and put them back up again. I think Kentucky Space, with its partner NanoRacks, we're also involved in designing and flying free-flying small satellites that, we're a collaborative organization, so we hope to collaborate with lots of people around the country that are interested in getting into this and experiencing this new endeavor.